Hello and welcome. This is Business Edge on News Central. I'm Tolulope Adelere Balogun. Our headline story: review of Nigeria's Petroleum Industry Bill. Now, oil regulation in Nigeria has been an issue of debate for the past 40 years. Several attempts have been made to regularize the legislations. Emphasis on this started in 1999, and since then, the Petroleum Industry Bill has been reworked, reviewed, revisited, whatever you want to call it. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of one of the most anticipated pieces of legislation ever in Nigeria. We'll also touch base with a few stories we're keeping our eyes on with NC4 to watch before we wrap the show. Welcome. This is Business Edge. The Nigerian government has rejected a proposal by communities in the Niger Delta that their revenue from hosting upstream activities in their localities should be 4 times higher than the 2.5% of operating expenditure slated in the Petroleum Industry Bill, or the PIB. Now, during 2 days of public hearings on the PIB that held from the 25th of January to the 26th, the host communities of Nigeria producing oil and gas, HOSTCON, demanded that this figure should be 10% in order to compensate for the negative impact of upstream activities. Nigeria's Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Timothy Silva, opposed the demand, arguing that the proposed 2.5% provision in the PIB is reasonable. HOSTCON President Benjamin Tamaranabi argued that the Niger Delta communities deserve 10% after 6 decades of environmental degradation. This current argument could further delay the passage of the PIB if no concrete agreement is reached. However, it is not only the host communities that are uneasy about certain provisions in the bill. Mark Sangster, chairman of the Oil Producers Trade Section OPTS, representing the interests of about 30 upstream companies in Nigeria, including Chevron, Eni, ExxonMobil, Shell, and Total, said the PIB's provisions could adversely impact the development of deep water fields. His presentation said the PIB should grant full royalty relief to deep water oil projects during the first 5 years of production, or perhaps incorporate a phased royalty scheme. Sangster also added that the bill fails to address the challenges of developing gas fields in Nigeria, which include inadequate midstream infrastructure and regulated gas prices, which could hamper the government's goals for the sector. The OPTS proposed that the PIB should provide a clear path for transitioning to free market-based pricing, not add additional compliance conditions on domestic gas delivery obligations as a precondition for export gas supply, and allow pre-existing contracts and agreements to run their course. Joining me to discuss this is Budget Nigeria's Senior Program Officer Adejoke Akinbode. Budget is Nigeria's leading civic tech organization working to raise standards of transparency, citizen engagement, and accountability, especially in public finance. Adejoke, thank you so much and welcome to Business Edge. Thank you for joining us. All right, so I think we'll take a quick time out in terms of working that out, and then we'll get into our conversation. Stay with us. Budget Nigeria's Adejoke Akinbode, Senior Program Officer, joins me on Business Edge. Adejoke, thank you so much for joining us. So let's get straight into this. The oil and gas sector, which we all see as the mainstay of Nigeria's economy, is still largely governed by the Petroleum Act and the Petroleum Profit Tax Act. These came to be in 1969 and 1959, respectively. Now, since the enactment of these laws, the global oil and gas industry has changed significantly from an investment, governance, and fiscal perspective. Certain obsolete acts of the Act have, of course, been amended, but their inadequacies are evident. So straight to the first question I have for you. Why has it taken so long? This is now 13 years since the introduction of the PIB in some form or fashion, and now we're here in 2021.
Thank you, Tolulope, for having me. So what we will say is that the bill has actually been, it's over 20 years now. And 2018, we were very close to them passing the bill, and after the hearing at the National Assembly, both House of Rep and Senate, the President Muhammadu Buhari refused to assent the bill. And then I believe we believe it was due to some of the things that were in the bill. And what they did then was that they actually split the bill into 4 components. So it was just one of the bills that was being passed, the PIGB, that's the governance aspect of the bill. But the president did not assent to it. Just everybody was very, very hopeful, and probably due to some of the components, maybe they were not comfortable with some components of the bill. But the bill now that we are talking about now, the 2020 PIB, the 4 components has been incorporated into one again, how it was before. So hopefully, we believe now that since it's just one, instead of them working on 4, it shouldn't take time for them to conclude the bill and assent to it like the previous ones. So hopefully, everybody's been hopeful that they're going to assent this bill this time around. Thank you.
So one of the main issues has been with what the host communities are asking, and we know the situation with the Niger Delta, the environmental degradation that has happened there over the years since the very first exploration activities. The Ogoni cleanup has been massive. We know that report that came out from the UN agency. So host community development considerations are quite limited to the creation of trust funds by oil and gas companies themselves, without strong representation and decision making by these host communities. Now, ideally, you would expect the bill to provide a much more holistic framework for host community development beyond trust funds set up by the IOCs. What do you think about this, particularly the fact that the bill would give the power or the decision making behind the trust funds into the hands of the same people who many times are responsible for the situations the communities find themselves in?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The creation of the Host Communities Development Trust is actually very good. It's a fantastic one. It's a welcome idea, and because the utilization of this fund will take into consideration those communities' needs from a social, environmental, and economic perspective. And like you said, the bill's major flaw is the non-inclusive arrangements of the community members. So I think what they can do is that the committee members don't have to take the upper power in decision making, but they should be included. They should be part of the decision making, how the trust fund is going to be utilized, because they know their own needs from the community's aspect. They know their needs assessments. So I think what they can do is that they need to put into consideration maybe 1 or 2 representatives from each communities, or maybe there's a way these communities are being enclustered together, so they can have representatives to sit at the board of these trust funds, so that when decision is being taken, they know what they are coming from them. They're bringing knowledge from their own community and bringing it to the board. Yeah, so that's the bill's major flaw, because it not only relegates host and impacted communities to the role of mere spectators, it also overlooks the existing community structures. Because we have the traditional institutions, we have the cultural and statutory organizations initially. So I think there should be a way that they will be included in decision making. But the creation of the trust fund is very good. It's a fantastic one, like I said earlier. So just for them to try to include members of the representatives from the host communities.
Okay, so
they need to include that in the bill.
All right, staying with the host communities, because there are a few issues around them that particularly have come up inside the bill. One of the other major sticking points is that the host communities are actually asking for 10% rather than 2.5% in terms of compensation for environmental issues and development. Now, we've seen pushback from the international oil companies as well as government. Adejoke, tell me, where is the middle ground on this? What do you think that the communities deserve for the fact that this resource that is very valuable and critical to Nigeria is extracted from their communities?
So from the host communities perspective, they deserve more than the 2.5%. But at the same time, I think too much burden should not be put on these oil companies, because there's this 3% that they pay annually to governments, which government gives to Niger Delta Development Commission, NDDC, majorly for Niger Delta region. Then there's also this 13% derivation that oil-rich states get from government. So even the 2.5, fine, it looks small, but I think 10% might be like a burden to the oil companies. So even if they want them to increase the 2.5, 10% to me is on the high side, you know, on the high side, because the oil companies are already paying so many dues, so many levies to governments. So for them to create development trust fund for the communities, the 2.5 percentage, I will say that the community should accept that for now, and let's even see how this trust is being managed. And let's see what comes out of it first, because I wouldn't want it to be at the end of the day they get this money and some people are actually siphoning the money for themselves. Let's see what the developments will look like with this trust fund with the 2.5%.
And you talk about siphoning, and that actually has been one of the major criticisms that the major oil companies operating in the Niger Delta have had. They said that there are community leaders and elders who actually take the money that's meant to go to helping and developing the community. You also mentioned the Niger Delta Development Commission, the NDDC, and it was just last year, I don't think many of us in Nigeria have forgotten how much money was reportedly allocated to the NDDC in terms of COVID relief. We've also had the conversation about projects under the NDDC that were never started, were started and never finished, were somewhere in the middle. So there really are a lot of questions as to how the monies meant for the communities actually get to the communities and actually serve the aim they're meant to. So let's talk about another issue with the communities. And now this is the fact that this bill is placing the responsibility on the communities to prevent third-party damage to infrastructure. It punishes whole communities by reducing their trust fund allocation if damage occurs. So Adejoke, let's really be honest with ourselves here. Are the IOCs really being fair in terms of what they're asking? So they want communities to be responsible and be on the lookout basically for damage or vandalization. They don't want to give more than 2.5%, and even they don't want to put the communities on the board of the trust fund so they can also help point the direction to where the money should go. Do you really think we're going to see a resolution regarding this conversation, especially with the host communities?
Okay, so I wouldn't say they're not being fair, and I wouldn't say they're being fair. So I just believe that there should be a need for balance, you know. So if the IOCs are being compelled to set up host, development trust fund for communities, and they say, okay, it's 2.5% they want to put into that, fine, the funding looks small, but there should be a need for balance. We also don't, the government shouldn't put too much burden, like I said, on these complaints so that it will not chase the investors away. But looking at the damage to infrastructure that they said is community members that will bear the cost, the burden, the cost damage, and they will lose their trust fund. I think if we are being sincere with ourselves, most of this damage actually comes from indigenous of these communities. This damage, and fine, they might be angry that they're not getting anything and go and break pipelines and all. So if this punishment is directly going to the community members, then that's giving them a sense of responsibility that they need to look out for these things and talk to themselves that, oh, if we damage these pipelines, we are going to lose so amount of money that they want to use for our communities. Then it will give them some sense of responsibility, and I think they will even be willing to protect these facilities, like I said. And also there should be a need for balance. The security agencies responsible for protecting these facilities should also be a part of the punishment as well. It shouldn't go to the community members because if you see, most times these security agencies actually collude with some members of the communities to damage these pipelines. They are even the ones that actually tell them where the pipelines are, the one that is carrying crude oil at some point. So they give them information. If they don't give them information, there's no way these members and the community members will know which pipeline is working at a point in time. So these security agencies should also be responsible. They should it should be a win-win situation. Community members and the security agencies should bear the brunt of damage to pipelines. So it will give them a sense of responsibility that, oh, if anything happens, we are losing our trust fund. So trust me, I think there will be. Recently, we've seen development in pipeline breaks. According to NNPC reports, it's been reducing drastically. So if this is also put in place, I think the reduction in pipeline breaks will be very, very high. So we are going to. So I think it's a good thing that community members will bear the grunt. Then they should also share the punishment with security agencies as well. So,
all right,
yeah,
Adejoke, let's take a break here. When we come back, we'll talk about gas flaring, which is also a major aspect, and not too sure how much of the PIB addresses that. We'll also look at the creation of environmental remediation funds, and after 13 years, will the issues that are bedeviling Nigeria's oil and gas industry, well, Adejoke says 20 years now, will the issues bedeviling Nigeria's oil and gas industry be sorted with the passing of the PIB? That conversation, part 2 of it, continues after this. Stay with us. Now, still taking a review of Nigeria's Petroleum Industry Bill, which sat in front of the Senate, resumed hearing for that, and now we also know going to the House of Representatives and hopefully should be passed anytime soon. Adejoke Akinbode is with me. Adejoke, so let's look at gas flaring. I know there have been some changes to the structure around fines and things about 2018, but Nigeria and local operators lost approximately 90.9 billion cubic feet of natural gas due to gas flaring in the period from January to May 2020. Authorities estimate that the financial loss due to gas flaring is close to about $230 million during those months. And estimates say that the proper channeling of flared gas could impact the country's gross domestic product by up to $1 billion per year. It could also create up to 300,000 jobs and produce about 600 million tons of liquefied petroleum gas per year, and also generate 2.5 gigawatts of power. So is there anything in the PIB as it stands that addresses this issue of gas flaring and how to even develop that particular stream of the oil and gas industry?
Like gas flaring, so I think the first thing government needs to do is to strengthen the current gas flare commercialization program, So if then there should also be liberalization of gas prices in Nigeria. So gas prices should not be fixed. So if I generate my gas, then I can sell at any amount I want, So that will give oil and gas companies the more confidence to generate gas rather than flaring it. Then the major thing actually that the government should do is they need to look at the gas flaring penalties in the PIB. So because presently the gas flaring penalties they're not tax deductible, So penalties for gas, they're still very low compared to the impact of the same offense. So I mean, flaring of gas is cheaper for companies. So they would rather say, let me flare this gas and pay the penalties rather than setting up or transporting my gas for usage. It's very, very expensive in setting up these equipment. And one thing government should do is, if they can actually front providing equipment for gas commercialization, maybe companies too will follow suit, If governments, Nigeria ourselves, we don't even have, we don't have enough gas commercialization equipment, and then companies will be like, oh, how much am I flaring? Am I going to pay for penalties? So if there is a strong penalty for gas flaring, it should be very, very expensive for companies. If it's more expensive for them to flare gas, then they will set up processing of gas and transporting the gas for usage.
Okay.
For now, so penalties, government should look into the gas fare penalties and make it very,
harsh.
Very huge for companies, and they will stop flaring, because really gas flare, for now, though there's been a reduction in gas flare for some like 2 years now, at least in Q3 of 2020, the gas flare was just 6.6% of gas production. It has actually reduced drastically compared to what we used to have for like 12% of what they produce per month. But then it could be better.
Okay.
It could be better.
Adejoke, so let's look at the creation of environmental remediation funds. And many say that this could actually be a positive step. But the bill should actually also clearly place responsibility for environmental regulation under a specific individual. So you have the Ministry of Environment and you have NOSDRA as well. And this is to avoid a conflict of interest for the two proposed new regulators. Who do you think should be responsible for and expanding the maximum returns from the industry in terms of this area? So are we going to see shared cooperation, shared responsibility? Should it be one person taking over? How this plays out? What are your thoughts?
So the Environmental Remediation Fund is a laudable feature of the PIB, and particularly its response to the growing clamor by environmentally degraded communities for the cleanup of their polluted lands, But I think the right course of action to place responsibility for environmental regulation should be under the Ministry of Environment and NOSDRA, because their goal is it doesn't include optimizing profits for the oil and gas industry. So they're just basically focused on how these communities will be cleaned up, So the responsibility should be more of the Ministry of Environment and NOSDRA.
Okay. All right, Adejoke Akinbode, we're going to end the conversation here. Senior Program Officer for Budget Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining me on Business Edge.
Thank you, Tolu, for having me.
All right. Okay, we'll wrap up now with NC4 to watch, and we start with more conversation about the oil and gas sector. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, has said that all forms of energy will be needed to support the post-pandemic recovery and address future energy needs. Now, according to the cartel, oil is expected to retain the largest share of the energy mix throughout the outlook period, accounting for about 27% share till 2045. Eskom hopes its proposed retail tariffs for 2021 will help solve a looming problem triggered by increased solar generation across the country. It cites a research study that projects between 3.5 billion and 4 billion rand in revenue would be lost to photovoltaic solar generation by the end of the year. Many would argue these numbers are actually on the low side. You also have the International Finance Corporation, the IFC, which is the private investment arm of the World Bank Group, has given a 1.1 billion Kenyan shillings loan to Kio Limited to help the company weather the challenges created by the COVID-19 pandemic. Kio Limited is based in Tanzania and is the largest producer of glass bottles in East Africa. The company, which mainly supplies gas bottles to beverage companies, has been severely affected by the closure of bars and restaurants in some East African countries, as well as the restriction on public gatherings. And finally, Mauritius and Morocco have joined 8 African countries that are part of the Bloomberg African Bond Index to provide investors with a tool to measure and track Africa's local bond market's performance. The set of indices are administered by the African Development Bank and calculated by the global index provider, Bloomberg. And that's it on this edition of the show. Thank you, as always, for joining us. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. Do have a good day.